Good morning, everybody. Well, a lot. Even Gustavo is here. So we can start. All of you know perfectly David Boehringer. David Boehringer is one of the most famous researchers in remote labs, ontology, semantics, and this kind of more or less difficult thing for many of us, like me. As you know, David is the project leader of the LILA project. The presentation is the sharing of online laboratory beyond technology. For me, the sharing of online laboratory is one of my questions, so I am very happy to have a conference. If you want, we are going to start. It's okay for you?
Yeah, thank you, Javier, for this nice introduction. And good morning and welcome to all of you. I must say I'm really impressed because I would have never made it. And actually I'm famous for skipping keynotes. And I think that's the reason why I probably thought, how could we make David be at a keynote at least once? Oh, let's make a give one. And that's the idea worked out. Here I am. And so thanks a lot for giving me the possibility to see what a keynote is like. Now, my name is Boehringer. I'm working at the computer center of the University of Stuttgart, where I'm head of the media department, where we have a web server of the university, services, and all the e-learning infrastructure like the learning management system, lecture recordings, virtual labs. And say, in that capacity, I was coordinator of the LILA project that ran from 2009 to 2011. And in this project, we tried to build an infrastructure to serve the sharing of laboratories, or sharing of the labs and the connected materials. Analyzing the obstacles that were there, we developed a couple of features to be integrated in the portal, which are listed here. You can read it very well, but you have to believe me when I say that the greatest wish that users had for that, which we got from a questionnaire, was to get a searchable database. And say we had to connect the experiments with metadata so people could search for it. Second wish was teaching materials for those experiments. Then an easy integration into learning management system, which we realized with a simple SCOM-compatible wrapping of the experiments. Then for the remote labs, a booking system and secure user authentication, which are obviously needed there. And 3D environments, user tracking were considered as important. Also the environment we gave up. We started with it, but we gave that idea up, and then comes here very high concern, the support on the technical side and on the pedagogical side. But in the context to establish a sustained usage of those materials in our university, and in our dissemination efforts in our universities, we experienced a lot of difficulties that have nothing to do with technology and that have nothing to do with our sharing infrastructure. And these non-technological issues are the topic about which I would like to talk today. First, I will give you my point of view of the current situation, and I will make a SWOT analysis for the product online lab, and from this I will draw some conclusions what could be done in the future. So let me start with the current situation. Remote controlled experiments for educational purposes have existed for over 10 years, and there has been a rapid increase in developments in this field since 2000. However, most of these developments have been isolated examples of what can be achieved. Now, this was a quotation from an article by Martin Cooper from 2005, and I'm really wondering if much has changed since. At the beginning of the LILA project, our colleagues from Delft went to all the different partners looking for their usage of online labs, and then made one disturbing observation, stating that the weakest aspect of the project, paradoxically, is the current usage of experiments in the learning process of students that is limited even at the sites of the partners we visited. Both the frequency of use and the numbers of teachers involved is limited. And concerning this, also I have to admit that not much has changed. Now, the diffusion of e-learning is often explained by the diffusion of innovations according to Rogers, who described 5 categories of people who would adapt the innovation: innovators, early adapters, an early majority, late majority, and laggards. In the end, he drew that adoption to the timeline and got this as a shaped curve resembling a logistic function. For us, the exact definitions that or this descriptions Rogers gave to those categories are not that important. We can give our own definitions there, but I think these are helpful to explain the state we are in right now. And I believe that we are in between here, between innovators and early adopters, with innovators being those who have first developed online labs and introduced them into teaching, and the early adopters being the first teachers who would actually use that kind of material when they get it. In the LILA project, we conducted a questionnaire in 2010. All in all, we got 92 good full answers to our questionnaire, with a range mostly from Germany and Greece, and then mostly from physics and electrical engineering. But nevertheless, I think it gives a valuable overview what the knowledge and beliefs about online labs are currently. And one of the questions was how much knowledge or experience those people would have. We get this nice bell-shaped curve here with people stating that they have some experience, fewer with little or significant experience, and even fewer with none or extensive experience. Now, I filtered the answers of those who had none or very little experience to see what their knowledge and their opinions about online labs were, with a theory if those could be early adopters in taking over that, and compared that to the answers of those who had owned online labs, which I would take to be the innovators. Rogers described 5 stages in the decision process to take over innovation. First of all, people need to get to know about the product, and then when they're interested, they seek for more information in the persuasion phase. Now, from my people who had no experience in using it, at least 2/3 of them were aware that online labs, or remote labs in this case, remote labs could be used in the teaching of engineering and sciences. Now, coming to the decision process, they would really have to weigh the pros and cons to see whether they would reject or accept the innovation. And here, the clear result was that most of them claimed they would probably or definitely use online labs in their teaching. So acceptance for them is very good. Now, what do we have? We have a group of people interested to do that. We have the materials and we have the sharing infrastructure. So everything could be perfect, and there could be really some momentum in the diffusion and usage of online labs. But what was actually happening is this. Also, the people who were open to the idea of using online labs in their teaching were not actually implementing the material in their curriculum. Now, why is that? And so that's going to be the rest of my talk. Going to see why we do have that red cross there. I am working at a service center of the university, so in a way online labs are a product I have to offer, and so I want to make a SWOT analysis. What strengths and weaknesses are, which would be an internal view, or with external influences, what the opportunities or threats to the diffusion of online labs are. Now, starting with the weaknesses. One important point is the time effort that teachers have if they want to take up those experiments in their teaching, and it's not that it's so complicated for them to look into the technology or usage of an experiment, but they really need to provide or create all the surrounding materials like assignments, and they, more importantly, they would have to change their way of teaching in a way, and going from more teacher-led to a more student-led education, and so that is quite a decision and not easy for a teacher to make, and so they are hesitating. Reliable availability was the question, especially for remote labs. Will the lab be available when I need it? In my curriculum, I have a 2 weeks time slot for this topic. Will it be there? And another question is technological reliability. Because I tried that, didn't work. Damn, what's the matter there? Mostly these are browser problems or plugins in certain browser versions. And even some security issues came up with old versions of the Internet Explorer that had to be used in order to conduct the experiment. Coming here, support. They came to us, then they say, well, when the students have it, who will do the support? I have to do it, my university services do it, the content provider does it, how much support is needed there anyway? Quite often, and the problem is not that great, but certainly for a teacher, that's hard to estimate. Then, sometimes where there was criticism about the restricted interactivity possible in the online labs, saying here, you click on the start button and some activity takes place on the screen, and then you have the save data button. Students get a file and they can do some data processing or calculations, and it can hardly be called experimentation. That's true. Then the problem is the weak integration online labs have in the providing universities, and that concerns the curriculum of those universities, but also the sustainable provision of the labs. Here you see that it all rests on the activity of devoted individuals, and there is hardly any institutional basis. Not wanting to frustrate you, there are strengths of online labs, of course, as well. I jumped through that, they are well known, but they also came up in our discussions with the teachers, so I want to mention them. Of course, accessibility, anytime, anywhere is a promise, and it's largely true, so that is a very good argument for the usage. Then we had the second best to being there, and so that was an argument for the very big classes of engineers, where students are sitting in a big lecture hall, maybe watching an experiment the lecturer would give to them, but they remain inactive all the time, and all the time of the course in that lecture. And so bringing in online labs is a good possibility to activate them. Second usage is often when you have very expensive equipment, like our colleagues in chemical engineering from Cambridge have it. And so if universities don't have the equipment themselves and cannot afford to buy it, which firstly they would like to do it always, then they're quite open in using others' equipment. We have good learning success. So there are a couple of studies, and I'm especially about Lindsay studies there. So online labs are as good as being there, sometimes even better, depending on the learning objectives in there. It's only not known to teachers. Easy usage. Now, the simplicity sometimes our experiments have, and especially simulations can have, can be an advantage as well, because it's really a reduced complexity where you can concentrate on a very specific learning objective, like the visualization of things that cannot be observed in nature, like magnetic fields. Then, especially virtual labs can be a great preparation for hands-on lab sessions. There's a time shortage, so if students are better prepared, they are going to work faster, which they did, and they also worked better with less mistakes. So this is in the material sciences in Stuttgart now always used as a preparation for the hands-on lab sessions. We get a lot of positive feedback from students. So the satisfaction level is quite high, and they feel motivated when they use the material. And then that means they spend more time with the topic, and I hope at least that this will lead to a greater learning success in the end. Then online labs still have the image of an innovative technology, and so in this room we might wonder why they've been along for such a long time, but still the teachers are attracted there, and of the early adopters I told you, 1/3 of them said, well, I will set up my own remote lab, that's what I want to do. So it's really this spirit of the pioneers in there. Like collaboration with companies is a strong point, and you can see that here at the REV conference, for example. And we want to make better teaching and learning in the sciences. They want to sell their stuff, so it's a very good combination. And last but not least, we do have a devoted community who is really into the topic and wants to help newcomers, explain them the things, give them first support. So that is a very strong point for laboratories. So with all those strong points, are there any threats? Yes, there are. And one very bad obstacle we have is this maxim of publish or perish. Say researchers all in their reputation at university teaching very little. And when you're a young researcher, you better see that you do research to come forward and not do a good teaching. Or even if you have great success there, it's not recognized by the system. And so that is very bad for teaching in general, and when we combine this with the time effort needed to introduce online labs, that's really a horrible combination. Secondly, there are a lot of prejudices in faculties when you go talking to the people, and we don't have to take all the prejudices too seriously, because often they are an excuse not to change anything. But still, some of those prejudices are really believed to be true. One of them is that online labs keep students away from real labs. So that is something I found more often. We also found it in our questionnaire, where one academic stated there, the virtual world behind a computer screen is different from the real world humans experience every day. For most, it is surprising to see that physics phenomena indeed do exist in the real world and are not just computer mock-ups. Well, I don't want to comment that too much. I just want to give you another example from biology. So here you see Hans-Jürgen as he's watering his virtual cactus, which he does once a week. And he's so German without any compromises. I love Hans-Jürgen, and for showing you what prejudices are, I just thought that this was very appropriate, and from now on it will be the Hans-Jürgen argument that people have there in the faculties. Second one, we need better learning for success if we want to change anything, because hands-on labs are best, and so if you do something else, it must be better. And so questioning learning success was a fair question, but it's never asked for the hands-on labs if all those sessions are really straightforward to learning success, and if people are not thinking in learning objectives, the answer is often no. Nevertheless, we have to do this. Are there any opportunities there that we can combine our hopes with? And that was a tough one, really, thinking what are developments coming from outside that are really good for us in the diffusion of online labs. And I came up with two. One is European, mainly the Bologna process and the discussion of learning objectives. So I don't know if you're all familiar what the Bologna process is. Starting in 1999, it was supposed to create the united European higher education area with degrees of bachelor and master system. And also modularized education was introduced there, and the modules had all to be combined with learning objectives. And now describing learning objectives was a very new experience for teachers, at least in Germany. And so I think in the course of this discussion that online labs could really play a role, because in focusing on the learning objectives that could lead to a well-informed discussion what kind of lab, be it hands-on, remote or virtual, could be suited to serve learning objectives under the respective circumstances, like group size or availability. Second part is a bit of paradox, because the reluctance and unwillingness of pupils to study sciences and engineering should be an opportunity for online labs. Well, it is. There's a lot of national and international funding there now to attract pupils to those subjects, and here suddenly the motivation and the fun part of taking the materials is of a higher priority, and there very well online labs can play a good role. Now, wrapping this up, a businessman would now have to decide whether he would give up his product or go into a marketing strategy. If I'd be a businessman, to be honest, I'd give up, because I think the obstacles are too great in there. But I'm not a businessman, I'm an academic, and I don't really have to sell that, and I don't need a return of investment in there. So that's my good part, so I will continue to see what can be done. First of all, I would like to describe a few measures that can be done against weaknesses and threats. Time, effort. Support the exchange of teaching materials, and that's on the Creative Commons license, so things also then can be reused and rearranged. Teaching materials were actually for the early adopters the most important thing for the public, even more important than a researchable database. So we would have to go into that, those needs. reliable availability. Obviously, with booking systems, you get some security that the lab would be available. And the other thing that it's actually maintained during that time. That's a tougher question because if you have service level agreements, there should be some kind of payment going, otherwise no one would guarantee the lab is there. Payment is a different issue that I'll talk about later. Technological reliability, well, we've had it as this conference as well, get rid of the plugins as far as it's possible and work together with the companies in that as well. So I think National Instruments should really support this, because also better clients, easier usable clients would promote the use of online labs greatly. Scientific reputation. There our colleagues from the University of Tübingen had a good idea, and that is make learning materials that had been prepared quotable and quotable in publication lists. They've connected the learning materials being on their repository, connected them with a persistent identifier, and with that, these are publications just like scientific publications, and so some recognition, at least in the length of the publication list, would come to a researcher or an academic who devotes his time for this, and at the same time it could prove a little bit his engagement in teaching, which is at least a weak argument in the latest struggle to get a permanent position. The prejudices, well, can be seen as tilting at windmills, and still we need to collect information for those who are interested. Those who don't want to be convinced, we should forget them, no matter what we do, but those who are open to the idea, there we have to collect material. Now, when we start talking on our universities and the diffusion, pretending, well, now we have information material, we go running, how do we get this into our universities? So I have observed two different ways how e-learning spread in universities, at least in Germany where I had the overview, and there were two different kinds of learning management systems, mostly coming from the central services, and they tried to convince academics who convinced peers and try to go to some decision makers or evangelists who are really opinion makers, and we try to approach them as well, and sometimes the way was not very direct, going over the assistance of those decision makers, but that differed from faculty to faculty. So you really need to know the communication culture within a faculty to know how to reach those people and convince those people. So it's always a one-by-one decision what to do, and more e-learning tactics than an e-learning strategy. Now the second possibility is that it comes from the rectorate top down. Often Vice President for Education decides this, tells the deans, tells the central services to provide the infrastructure, and if something like that happens, the development is much faster. Now the situation for our online labs is somewhat different, because mostly academics have developed the materials, and now they want to get them into the university, and I think they have to go two ways, two different audiences with two different purposes. One for usage, go to the decision makers, and one for maintenance, go to the central services to see how really the labs can be provided in a better and more secure way. Now, when you try to convince the target audience, it's also good to know their needs or demands, and we got some hints what these could be in the Lila questionnaire. So what categories of online experiments or activity would be useful additions to your courses? And so most popular among all was the combination of real experiment and simulation. Now, if we have that with remote experiments and simulations, hybrid labs, as they are called in Lab2Go terminology, are known, but unfortunately they are not that widespread. But you see, most people ask for that. I won't go through all the different things there. I can provide the slides later on. Have a look at that. Now, what is the educational setting that would be used? And one all, primarily lecture demonstrations. These are really was the first thing all of them answered. So that might be a good entry point before you use the material in your classes, where there was a significant difference between the early adapters and those who already had online labs. Those who already had online labs would really have unsupervised group exercises or unsupervised coursework, whereas early adapters think they would rather use it in class tutorial exercises or supervised laboratory style sessions. So that was a slight difference in the answers there. All in all, I think more details about these opinions are needed if we want our information campaigns to be straightforward to reach the target groups. And eventually, of course, a cost discussion would come into that, and that had to consider the total budget spent on laboratories used in education, and so that is a discussion. For example, the LabShare project has started in Australia, and I think that's a very good approach to see the total and then decide what should be, what can be hands-on or what be done remotely. Well, it is, if we assume there would be greater uptake by universities, it's not clear on what level then sharing would start, because sharing of labs would only start here, and we have been so far, at least on a regular basis. Right now there is some sharing, but not much, and really not on a regular basis. So a state level or a national level is easier to imagine than an international level. Maybe you could have it a specific subject like electrical engineering. I don't know. And when you have that sharing of labs on a regular basis for remote labs, eventually probably some cash flow must be involved, and that is where our informal federations are somewhat reaching their limits. But the questionnaire also showed, assuming that the value delivered by the online experiment was sufficient, what, if anything, would you be willing to offer in return? Well, experiment has to be freely available if you would acknowledge the creator. Yeah, fair enough. That one, if you can see it, give a small fee. This is the same for content providers and early adapters. No difference in there. It's only the lab providers like some form of reciprocal usage agreement, so that is something they are favoring. But still, right now they are offering their materials for free, sometimes even unlimited, and they are not expecting much cash right now for their experiments, and well, it's good because nobody is willing to pay anyway. But so this remains a big problem. Now, if we see where would you like to get the material from, rather directly from the content provider or via service broker, and there it is clear that people prefer to get it directly, not via a service broker. Sometimes very strong opinions were given in the questionnaire, what people wrote, that it must always be directly and not over service brokers. Now the content providers have a stronger preference there, probably because they hope that it would be made easier for them to deliver the lab and possibly get some money, I don't know. So, but that was a significant difference here, but still most of them would like to offer the labs direct. Now, if people are not willing to pay, what else would they provide? And so, in the context of Lila, but I think in general that can be taken there. A lot of them use just, but that's fine if the stuff is used. It really gets on the people, but also contribution in forums and provide own online experiments, publicize the partnering, the whole thing. And even here, pedagogical and technological support. There's quite an openness by many of the people. I was surprised by that, and then even contributing to the development, the further development of the portal. And so for Lila, we were planning for a more community-based business model. I am not sure that really works out with the user community being too small, and once we get greater sharing activities, certainly more institutionalized organizational model for the sharing has to be developed. Now, earlier this week, I had a chat with Gustavo. And he said that, well, with Lila, I was the captain of one of the large EC projects in the area lately. And I told him that I rather feel like a captain in a dark harbor dive, telling tales about past adventures. And he didn't let me get through with it. He told me I had to be ready to set sails when the wind would blow again. And so, taking up that picture, I would like to wrap up my talk with what I think are the most important things to say. First, prepare that information material. Reportedly, I think of most importance, what I call the matrix of David criteria and lab types. So David criteria being the 13 learning objectives for the usage of laboratories in education as described by Faisal, and lab types are simply the three that we're talking about all the time. Then collect evaluation reports to show the effectiveness of online labs, show the rise of motivation, and really show people how that works in other places, and give good practice examples. Besides the examples, secondly, give them the resources of those experiments to try it themselves. So attach the teaching materials to those examples. So teachers who are interested could actually try it for one experiment, and then they can see if it works or not, what the pros and cons are. Third point. For common infrastructure and interfaces, be ready when there should be a greater sharing activity, that we don't have all our own infrastructures and cannot communicate with each other. So I think the efforts being done in GOLC, the Global Online Laboratory Consortium, right now are important and have to be continued. Then we still need to conduct projects, but these projects have to keep the whole in their view. For example, the common interfaces, but they also have to see for the technological stability, for more interactivity being possible. And they also have to see how their developments could be anchored in universities for a sustainable usage. every project has some funds for a restricted time, and then what is left if they've done upgrades? Very little. Last but not least, start that information campaigns in universities. Really get that started. Now the last point is not only trying to set sails, but also trying to induce some wind. And if a commitment of institutions of all the different kinds, laboratories should not be given, and there should only be hands-on labs, then the usage of online labs will remain a deliberate project-driven activity for which the infrastructure of sharing laboratories is not needed. And so these are the last words of the Soviet captain, and I would love to be proven wrong by you in the discussion and claim the opposite.
Any questions? Okay.
First of all, congratulations for the keynote. I think it was a good start. It's the first you have been. I think you went very well. Let me take one of your slides when you talk about the online experiments as a published material. Publish online experiments
Yes.
yeah, can you put that again? Because that, okay, just leave it. But I really like that idea, because that connects to 1C and 2, as you put there. Maybe we could devise a kind of quality seal for these online experiments. And if we want to develop such a quality seal for those online experiments that could be offered as an exemplary, then you will need some kind of criteria. And then you will need some kind of board or scientific board to actually devise that criteria and apply that criteria. Will you be able to join such a board? Do you think that it will be feasible? What is your view?
It is actually in the University of Tübingen, they are exactly trying to do this. They have all kind of material being published there and being quotable, and but having a board that concerns all of e-learning, not just online labs, to give some quality seal to that. The idea is there. It's always difficult to find the right criteria there, and it's hard to reject such a product if just the technology is working mostly, then it's yeah, okay, it works, but for the scientific value or educational value, it is really much harder to find the criteria and really correctly judge some material from that. So maybe there one criteria could be to give evaluation reports where that material was actually used, give students opinions about that material to make it more transparent, and so more indirect way of showing this is a good material.
More questions?
I'm here for the rest of the day, tomorrow. So.
No, at last I have one.
Okay.
When the majority of the online labs are connected to the labs, to the hands-on labs. Okay, so they are being offered by the lab responsibles or research group, something. But from your point of view, in one of the slides, very good presentation, very good slide. You said that the central service or IT service, something. So I think, from my point of view, is that we need to give our remote labs to the IT service, to the central service. Okay? doing this, we will be in charge to develop new experiments or new learning materials and so on. And we will not be responsible for offering them. Like the learning management systems, they are for offer contents in general, but they are not managed by teachers. Now they are offered by the IT service. So my question is, do you know any university that is doing this by this way? So they are, the IT service is offering the remote labs?
Actually, I'm not aware of this, but thinking about it, I thought it was necessary. There was a sort of development in the diffusion of learning management system, not happening often, but sometimes they start in faculties. They serve faculty, and from there it starts to serve the whole university. And usually the service team moves from the faculty to a simpler service like facilities. And say, I think something like that would have to happen, but I don't know, you're much more experienced here in the audience to tell if there is any example of this yet. You see this not to be the case.
More questions?
I don't think that
I
I don't think that remote laboratories as managing real equipment in for experiments with students can be managed by an IT staff. We should distinguish between the platform for delivering remote laboratories like LMS from the laboratories as places where we conduct experiments. These experiments should be part of the research groups, the faculties for teaching, but the platform for delivering, exactly as LMS, should be delivered and managed by the IT staff. So maybe one of the directions of the development of online labs should be to split these two parts in order to split the concerns. So research groups and faculty could be more focused on their own research and their own experiment, and getting rid of the IT management staff. What do you think about this? You know that you work in a research center, so that I think that we should try to see which could be some new ways for developing and managing this plethora of labs and experiments we have online, and already they don't have anything to be used as a common infrastructure at university.
Agreed that actually it cannot be pure IT stuff maintaining the apparatus for the experiments. Say there is the IT component, there is the lab equipment, and say we all know it's very difficult to separate, and you need different specialists to do that. Say I don't the answer to that. Say anyway, it must be centrally provided by people responsible for the maintenance, and that is not the case right now. However, that is realized.
More questions?
I'm not really an expert in remote labs or online learning, But I think I want to pose a few questions. From my observation, online teaching and learning and remote labs and all that, actually is the kind of eventually will be integrated in teaching and learning. I believe that's a fact. But the thing, this thing is that how do we actually take it up another level so that it will become widespread and accepted in the shortest way? For example, so how do you differentiate, what is essential component that for teaching and learning that actually require remote lab, and what actually do not require remote lab, but might be just okay for online learning and teaching. So somehow we got to distinguish that what is advantage or clear advantage of remote lab, so we can actually make use of that in teaching and learning. And then the fact that these days, people don't want to go to sit in the lecture for a long hour and all that, they can have a material everywhere. So what are the essential elements of online learning? So we can actually, develop online learning, remote lab, and how the interaction between the two. And other things, other comments include, are these things relevant only to engineering, physics, or science only? What about IT? We clearly distinguish where the strength of online, strength of remote lab to a particular area of learning, teaching and learning. And then we somehow build platform, we build standards, we build interface, and we focus on that. And then these things become true in few years' time. We don't talk about other things except that we have all these tools. Now we do research on that. We do actually teaching on that. I think that is the purpose of how we actually take it up another level. I think that's what I think that really we should focus upon, because taking for granted that online learning and remote lab will be integrated in the short future.
I don't know how much that was a question, but I would like to comment on that. I've been in this field now since 2002, and we've had all these e-learning projects and so on, and this is not a quick process. And there I used to say that universities are institutions from the Middle Ages, and they only start to change very slowly. And one problem in the introduction of the e-learning and new technologies was that thinking about learning objectives and what can be achieved was only questioned afterwards and not beforehand. And I think that's a change of approach that has to be. And no matter if we are talking about online labs or scenarios for software developers, and they are good scenarios in learning, or in any other subjects, we need to know what the possibilities of the new instruments are, and we need to know really what are the objectives that we should learn and what we want to create, and then choose the right scenario, the right technology, or no technology at all, because you just do it in a peer group work of a few students or whatever, and say this competence of not choosing the technology and saying why is not there yet. But I think that's the way it has to go.
We have two more questions, but please be fast because now we have run out of time.
I think I can do it quick. So first of all, thank you for an interesting talk. I really liked your SWOT analysis. And just for next year, I think it could be very interesting to do this analysis with the whole group here, so that all of us think on this topic. So I have two questions. On one side, we were talking about learning success, and I'd like to know what you mean by learning success. How do you define it for you and for your project? And then the other question would be on this slide, point 4, you say conduct project with view for the whole, and when you were talking about this point, you mentioned 4 technical aspects. But for me, view for the whole would have the students and the learning process in it. And that, in the next step, means for me that we have to integrate pedagogists and experts in this field. And I'd like to know how you do it in Stuttgart, and especially in the LEADER project. How do you integrate this view, the pedagogical view, on remote laboratories?
These were questions. The last one I still remember them. So in the LEADER project, we had colleagues from Delft to try to create their pedagogical view on it. But it was quite a parallel track of them and their ideas and of what was actually technologically not possible or being very inconcrete what they wanted to do. Say, also pedagogy, at least in this case, for us was still at the very beginning for creating the scenarios properly, and so we didn't put that together in a satisfying way, and much less in our situation in Stuttgart, where we have a didactical center where they have no knowledge whatsoever about media and media usage. So I cannot claim to be the best person now to tell me what to do. I know the other question you said with learning success. Well, learning success would have to be combined with certain learning objectives where you need to try with a questionnaire or maybe with the results from the examinations the students had, whether something was reached or not. If you're talking to teachers, it is better results in the exams. There it is very simple for them to think what a learning success is. Well, if that would be the only criteria, e-learning in a whole would not be very successful then, because just for the examination it ends up for the same no matter how people learn. So that's at least the summary of a lot of evaluations I've seen, that media in that case don't matter. And if you think that in a different way of thinking people learn better, they've never been asked, the students, 2 years later, what do you still know about the examination, and then compare they've learned with new media or in a different way and see what actually happens in the long term. I haven't seen that.
This would be our opportunity to do this with the remote labs.
But
We see this effect as well.
I think a lot of research is needed, is extremely interesting and very innovative, at least in my view. I don't know about Matt.
Okay, one question more, last question, but maybe it's going to be here, so you can ask after or during the coffee break.
Thanks. I really like the idea that you want to extend this project and these projects out a lot more. I wondered, apart from the diffusion of innovation model of Rogers, which is to do with agriculture from memory in farmers, whether there were other models, and again, Australian or American colleagues as well can help, whether there are other models of innovation that have really worked well in different universities with this kind of media. I don't know if you know.
I didn't hear the question.
Is that better?
Yes.
I'll shout. Do you know any other models of innovation in media that work that could be applied to this community? Because the model you use comes from a farming community, the Rogers one, which is about 62, I think.
something like that.
So I wonder if anyone knew or anyone who knew other models that would be better to get this stuff out.
There are other models, and say there's a article by Stephen Tuttle from Sydney, where he tried to apply different models in the uptake of innovations and introducing also interesting and good categories where it works a lot with the beliefs of the people and their perception of usefulness, for example, or the easy usage for them. Is it worth putting my time into it to learn how the smartphone works, for example? So these are the most important different categories introduced in there. But I'm not a specialist in that. I have only got that from this article.
So thank you to all of you. We are going to start with the next, but before we give you
track that's a massacre.
one. Now the engineer room is not going to run today. The other, we are going to be in the room just in front of this, 205. It's okay? Not, please don't go to the engineer room.